Hello, and welcome to Richard and Karl presents Deep Space and Dragons, Dragons, Dragons. I'm Richard.
And I'm Carl.
On
And
today's
well, I
oh,
mean, well,
fine.
I mean, just normally you do it a little bit like the other way around, where you present you're like, oh, hello everybody, and then we introduce ourselves and the title. But
Yeah, well, I'm trying to be
anyways,
antagonistic today.
fair enough. I mean, it is a bit villainous to just mix things up like that.
And with that, today's topic is going to be on villains, antagonists, and possibly numeric sequences. But before we begin, we need to dive into the dark, twisted world that is the Karlverse. What's new with you?
Well, I mean, as some of our listeners may be aware, I've been very casually building a sandblaster in the background. Uh, Not obviously not while we're recording because that would be too noisy. But uh, I have 100-foot air hose, but I don't have any way to properly store said air hose. Um, so I'm now, in addition to building my own sandblaster, I want to build my own storage unit for my air hose. And YouTube, and there's probably other video services too, but YouTube is my preference. Uh, has a video about this guy who he made wooden rings and then filled them with marbles to create like a wheel bearing. And I'm like, you know what? That sounds like it'd be pretty cool. And I bought some marbles, and I have the design idea in my mind about how I'm going to do it, and I'm going to try and create my own wheel bearing so that I can take like a empty can and attach this wheel bearing to the side and have it spin to be able to roll up my air hose, because 100 feet of air hose is unruly.
As the music dramatically swells, because you're slowly becoming on your path to supervillainy, the Sandblaster. I mean, it's just right there in the name. You're going to use it to write on their tombstones. But, drama aside, sounds like your project's taking shape. So, did you ever manage to make that satellite mirror lighting system?
Uh, that is another project that is actually pretty close to completion, but I'm a little bit stumped about. So, a satellite dish is a parabola, well, a paraboloid because it's 3D.
Ooh, fancy.
And if you put a light source at the focus of your paraboloid, it'll columnize the rays and shoot them all straight out, which we're so far away from the sun on the planet Earth that by the time the light rays hit the Earth, they're all practically parallel, which creates the shadows that are always the same size. I mean, obviously it depends on the location of the sun, how long your shadow is, but when you're walking down the street, no matter how far you walk down the street, your shadow is always the same, pretty much the same length. I mean, anyway, so you put your light source at the focus of your paraboloid, and then it reflects back collimated, like similar to the rays of the sun. And then you put some sort of filter in front of the reflected rays to scatter the rays, like the Rayleigh effect. Maybe I didn't say that right, but anyway, it's the effect that makes the sky blue because the light rays are scattered and only the shorter wavelengths actually make it through. And then you can make it look like it's a fake window with actual sunlight behind it. So I have the light source mounted on the arm of the satellite dish, and I have the frame that I plan on filling with soapy water to scatter the light rays. But I still have to buy the panes of glass that I will put the soapy water in between, and glass is expensive.
Glass is expensive. I was hearing a story from an acquaintance of mine who's doing a class on sustainable architecture, and apparently we're running out of nice sand, and you can only make
Mm-hmm.
good glass out of nice sand.
Mm-hmm.
So it's actually like a less renewable resource than you would think at the moment.
Well, because we use so much sand in concrete too, it's like, and then concrete itself is hard to nearly impossible to reuse. So like, that sand is a surprisingly non-renewable resource that I don't know how close we are to running out, but
Oh, fair enough.
it's.
And you're just gonna haphazardly blast it at things. I get it.
Hey, I never said I was going to use sand. In fact, I think I specifically said I was planning on using baking soda.
Fair enough. Hard to argue that logic.
Anything new with you there, Richard?
So, among my many juggling projects I've been working on, I've been spending far too much energy working on. So, I had an idea in my brain a while back that I wanted to do a novel about giant robots fighting.
Hmm.
And then I was working on, like, oh, I'm going to make a giant robot sports league. It takes place on an island, is streamed, people gamble on it. It's going to be a great series. So I have 4 spreadsheets as I was trying to figure out the tournament structure that would allow the prizing and financing of this giant robot tournament to work. Because I
Hmm.
need to calculate it that if I say, for example, X character costs $1 million to enter this tournament, I need to calculate how many participants are in it to figure out how much each round is worth to keep the dramatic tension high for each fight. So I now have a
Hmm.
completely sorted and structured out round robin Swiss pairing style giant robot fighting tournament with like 10,000, like I got like 30,000 words of the actual book done and another 10,000 doing the math behind this stupid tournament structure to make sure it'd be practical and make sense. And I am committed. It will work now with the correct number of participants. And then I had to figure out how many giant robots would be in the Giant Robot League. So it turns out someone did the math to estimate the cost of making a real world Gundam. I took
Hmm.
that number and I figured out which countries' GDPs could support building a giant robot, and I looked at
Hmm.
which corporations could afford to build a giant robot.
All right.
So I have my 100 giant robots because that's the number of countries combined with corporations who could actually afford to build giant robots for the purpose of fighting them in an arena. And then I
Hmm.
had to put the prize tournament structure in effect to actually make it that, well, we built these giant robots, how many matches do I have to win to get the value of my giant robot back for this tournament to even be worth it? So math has been done, progress has been made, and now I have to write this book, and the funniest part is, I can't actually write this research into the book. No one actually needs to know this. But now that I
Right.
have
Right.
it solid and committed, I can make sure that the specific spoofed company names and specific countries mentioned could actually be
Hmm.
competitors in this, and for the prizes to stay good, so I can actually make the system the story's based on make sense. And the best part is I'm writing it as an office comedy. So I did all this research. So I can then tell jokes later, and it's going to be beautiful when this thing comes together.
Well, I mean, I think the best comedies are the ones that have a solid format to them, like a solid structure to them. Uh, because then the references and callbacks, like you can create running gags, and then it'd be like, oh wow, that was actually like they were serious about this amount of prize money, or they were serious about this administrative process.
But yeah, like a little
And
spoiler for you, my friend, is there is a scene where they encounter the Saskatchewan party as a potential funder, and it is beautiful.
the Saskatchewan party, did they can actually fund a giant robot?
Turns out, no. However, they can put down if the owners of all the various teams named Rough Riders pool their resources together, they can do 10% of a giant robot.
Yeah, okay.
So they offer 10% to finance the team by 10%, and all they have to do is put giant green S's on everything.
Oh yeah, sponsorship deals. That
And with
yeah,
that,
okay.
moving on how sponsorship deals may be the truest villain, on today's topic we're going to go over numbered villains and their uses in various anime, video game, TV shows. So let's start off first with a definition, Carl. What is a villain and what is an antagonist?
Ooh, um, well, my thing about a villain, uh, is that the hmm, there is definitely a difference between an antagonist and a villain, and the antagonist is generally someone who is more relatable to our protagonist. Uh, and most people might define protagonist as a hero, but I would also say that heroes and protagonists are different because protagonists are really just the characters whose actions you're following, and then the antagonist is just the characters or things that oppose them. Um, but the less relatable your antagonist is, the more villainous they become.
To move on to that, let's give some examples of things that have literal numbered villains. We'll start with show favorite, the series Bleach, which had so many cool ideas, but then ended up being Bleach, a series that I have once said, quote, I would rather put bleach in my eyes than read more of Bleach, unquote. Disclaimer, do not put bleach in your eyes, even if it is
Uh,
more painful than reading a sometimes bad comic series.
just to add to that, liquid bleach or comic books bleach. Don't put either of those in your eyes.
Good disclaimer, yes.
Because the comic books will also cut your eyes, and you may still go blind. So just neither of those types of bleach. Don't do it.
So, Bleach famously is my go-to for explaining the numbered villain phenomenon, because it manages to go through 4 sets of numbered villains. So first, there's the 13 captains, each one of them with different lieutenants, sub-lieutenants. Then they start numbering their officers, where the larger the number, the worse the officer is. Where characters like, I'm Squad 7, 5th seat, Bald Guy McHavename. And I'm like, okay, Bald Guy McHavename, I will remember you. I use a stick. Alright, Bald Guy McHavename wields a stick. Then, when they made it to their next plot arc, they numbered the villains with physical tattoos. And the lower the number, the better the villain they were. Where they had a person that was literally number 103, and I'm like, wait, do I have to fight 103 villains? Yes. Yes is the answer. And after wrapping up that epic saga, they introduced 26 lettered villains, where each villain had a letter and a letter-based superpower. And I have to ask, do you like it when they put numbered villains in various animes, video games, and shows?
Well, me personally, it definitely it is on the verge of it is a trope, I guess, where it's something that you can set up and you can subvert expectations. So if done well, it can definitely make a story more interesting. In terms of as a mechanic for writing, it kind of makes sense in the long running formats that are like the weekly or monthly comics or shows. The numbered villains can almost serve as like a progress meter for the viewers. So it's like even if you miss an episode or two, it's like, oh, now you know they're on this villain, so you know that you can set your own expectations of how much longer they're going to be in this arc.
I mean, to follow up on that statement, even the fantastically written Rurouni Kenshin had 10 numbered villains when they got into the serious plot arc. Because sometimes you just kind of... So, as we may have touched on a little bit earlier with antagonists versus villains, is people love to write the layered, nuanced villain antagonists, the tragic backstory that shapes them to be almost an anti-hero with complex motivations. But sometimes we just want to watch a guy get beaten up with superpowers.
Yeah, and I mean, like, if you look at original Star Wars, like the Episode 4, where the Emperor, he is the villain for sure, and then he has an antagonist lieutenant in Darth Vader, but Emperor Palpatine was at the time just evil because there needed to be an evil force to oppose. And people didn't want to think that much about what they were fighting for. They just wanted to see someone, they wanted to see space wizards.
Also, an evil force, 10 out of 10, perfect joke. But yes, like so many almost every anime will at one point have numbered villains or will have a machine that gives you a power level to list exactly how strong your villain is.
Hmm.
And I honestly don't have a problem with numbered villains in moderation. Like, for example, if I'm running a D&D campaign, I'm not opposed to telling you there's X number of villains, or you defeated a lieutenant, or that you've defeated the 5th ranked person in the organization. I've pulled these tropes before, because they give you a
Hmm.
nice consistent idea of what's going to come next.
Right.
But when you pull that trick 4 times, it loses a bit of meaning.
I will say, Demon Slayer is a popular anime on Netflix at the time, or right now, I guess. Um, and they definitely use numbered villains, uh, but it like I was never really quite certain about like where these numbered villains actually sat on the power scale with each other because they all seem to be extremely like powerful, and then they just kind of like rushed through it all, and at closer to the end, it was like, well, like it wasn't really a progress meter. I don't really. I get the idea of setting expectations about what's to come, but then I don't know if they subverted my expectations or not. It was. I don't even know really if anything was added by having these numbered villains.
And then on the converse side, on one of my personal favorites, World Trigger, they've numbered so every single character in that show that's in the good guy organization has a number. And they've had
Mm.
a truly gigantically long tournament structure plot arc where you're literally watching the main character's number climb as they fight allies with different numbers. And the numbers are definitely they're committed to their numbers in World Trigger to an alarming degree, where the entire runtime of other shows have fit within this single tournament. You could watch the Snyder Cut in the time this tournament's been going. You could watch a 5-hour movie in the length of this tournament. Because this show's like, no, we're not going to send these newbies out into an exploration to alien worlds. They need to be high enough numbered. So you can fight the number. And I'm like, I'm glad someone else hit their head against a wall coming up with an accurate round robin. Sorry, not round robin. Swiss pairing tournament structure to rank their characters that actually would work.
Uh, yeah, I mean, that's definitely an example of I mean, we call them numbered villains, but they're definitely not villains. They're definitely antagonists. Not that the show doesn't have villains. It's just they're definitely not villains. They're
Yeah, the
more,
show has
more
definitely
on the
been
antagonistic side.
Yeah, the show's definitely been absorbed by the fighting tournament, but it has brilliantly well thought out fighting tournament rules. Although a friend of mine will fight me over the fact that the protagonist had a brilliant idea to use wires, and they're just screaming at the screen, being like, "You can't just have wires and suddenly win fights. That is stupid." I'm like, "Nah, I respect the wires. Wires are great." But that's a show where each character has a personal number, a team number, the numbers are broken into sub numbers, and there is a full spreadsheet for us to track all these characters while watching this show.
Another example of numbered characters where they're antagonists but not necessarily villains. I personally really enjoyed Squid Game, and like all the players of the Squid Game, there's 400 and some odd players at the start of the Squid Games, and they're all numbered. Uh, but then, obviously, as you dwindle down the numbers don't actually have meaning in terms of power level or anything within the show. But it definitely becomes more apparent that they're not necessarily villains as much as antagonists, and then there is a real villain in the background who is just evil just to be evil. He's just there to create a force of conflict for the players of the Squid Game.
So to follow up on that statement, here's my question to you: do you think numbered villains slash heroes are lazy writing, or just a way to remember a lot of characters more efficiently? Because when you give characters a number, you then have a way of referring to them easily. Where if a character just has a name, especially in a setting where you give people human names, it becomes very difficult to track who's what, when, where, why, and how.
Well, I mean, so going back to Demon Slayer, um, they have the numbered villains, and the numbered villains, at least to the heroes, don't have names. Uh, and so I feel like the numbered villains in that sense are definitely there mostly for the readers or more viewers, um, because then the author takes a lot of time to make sure that every single demon that gets slain, they have an idea of what that demon did in their life as a human before they were turned. Um, so I don't necessarily think that it's a sign of lazy writing, because you can use that to age your viewers, and then also use that to organize your own writing to be like this character, you have this archetype, and they're numbered this way, so you know what stories go together. When more details are actually revealed about the numbered villains. But when we're looking at Bleach, it's the numbered villains, numbered and lettered villains. Those were definitely just lazy writing. Like, oh, I'm villain number 10, but you get rid of that 0, and I'm actually villain number 1.
For the record, they got rid of the 1 and they were villain number 0. Got to get that clear, because that completely changes the bit.
Right. The lower the number, the more villainous they are.
Which, I mean, to be fair, being number 1 sounds more impressive than being number 132. A lot of number villains go top to bottom that way, because when you're a villain, you want to be number 1. And I mean,
you got to be like number 1, shining bright for everyone. Living out your fantasy, the brightest star for all to see.
That's all you're allowed to say, I'm pretty sure, legally.
I'm pretty sure, since I didn't actually sing the words, it's just a poem.
I mean, to be fair, one of the best cut-ins in any series ever, to give Bleach back some credit, is when the character plays their theme song heroically, does a heroic charging at the villain, and then you hear a record scratch as he's just defeated so soundly that the music gave up on him. That was a beautiful moment in anime.
I wish they had done that when Trunks fought Goku for the first time with the whole like one finger thing. Like, I would have been like, Trunks comes in with his like epic music, and then
right? Like, there's just some...
I also feel like Dragon Ball Z was like the direct inspiration for that single finger sword stop.
Oh, for sure. Dragon Ball Z was a direct inspiration for the last 20 years of anime. Just straight up.
On Dragon Ball Z, actually, interestingly enough, they don't really... Most of the numbered villains don't actually show up. But Mechanical Man number 8 shows up in the original Dragon Ball in Muscle Tower. And we assume that he was made by Dr. Gero, because then later on in life, androids 16, 17, and 18, obviously Dr. Gero just kept numbering his creations. And then if you accept the movies as canon, then there's Super Android 13.
With his magical trucker hat. The English dub was given a very bland movie for that one, and they tried really hard to add some character into it through their very creative voice acting choices they made. And I give them credit for trying, because they definitely tried. Whether or not they succeeded, that'll be for future generations to decide. But effort was made to add some life into what would have been an otherwise dull movie through for very questionable accents.
Questionable accents. That is true.
Okay, so let's start things off with our dragon question of the week. Dragon question of the week, yeah. Vamping for time as I load my list. Ah, here's a classic one. What is your favorite dragon from mythology?
A favorite dragon from mythology? Ooh. Mythological dragons. I'm a little bit frozen here, because like I'm not really sure mythological uh, like I like the Chinese style dragon because that's kind of like what Shenron is modeled after. But I couldn't really name any mythological Chinese dragons.
Yeah, one thing that's
And
interesting. Oh, continue.
well, when you say dragon from mythology, and again, I continue to think Chinese because it's like the Shendu from Dragon Chan Adventures. I feel fairly certain that he was rooted in some sort of mythology, and he is probably one of my favorite dragons.
Yeah, I was going to say I run into a problem with dragons because in a lot of mythology they're referred to as like a singular the dragon. Like Saint Peter killed a dragon, Siegfried killed
Mm.
a dragon. So a lot of the Western style fire breathing claws fights King Arthur dragons were just that, a dragon. So my pick is going
Mm.
to be a dragon from the Canterbury Tales, who is just a
Ooh.
dragon. Fiery claws, red scales, worked his way onto many flags. I'm going to say the traditional European a dragon is my pick for favorite mythological dragons.
Yeah, I'm going. I'm still saying I think Chinese mythological dragons are. Maybe it's because I grew up in Western culture, but I find the Chinese dragons to just be more interesting in general.
Fair
And then they
enough.
inspire things like the never ending story with the dragon in there, or well, I guess Smog was more of a Western
Yeah,
dragon,
I
but
was going to say we get Smog on my side. I've taken on this arbitrary fence we've both formed here, completely shifting this question for our own purposes.
I'm just saying I don't I yeah. There's not enough named dragons in mythology for us to be able to really narrow it down.
It
Well,
is
I guess maybe I just don't know from what Chinese mythology too, because there's a lot going on there.
like in Greek mythology, for example, we have the Dracanas, sorry, which are half women, half dragon, horrifying amalgamations. But they don't really get names; they just get described in eldritch abstracts, abstractions. I don't know, eldritch abstractions. There we go. That sounds like a sentence.
That does sound like a sentence.
All right, and our random question of the week comes back, ties back around a few episodes ago. What Gundam would you pilot and why?
What Gundam would I pilot and why? Um, the A-turn. That's the one with the mustache, right?
That is
I
the
got
one with
that
the
right?
mustache and the butterfly wings that kill everything from here to Jupiter.
Yeah, I don't really care so much about the butterfly wings. I just like the mustache and I like the giant novelty mace.
I do respect that. I mean, once upon a time I sent you a model kit for an SD Gundam with the hopes you could give it a mace, but I don't know if it actually came with one.
No, that little Gundam did not come with a mace. Although I did appreciate the Sharpie color scheme.
I have since upgraded to model paints, so if I were to ever do that again, I could actually paint the components. The theory was there, the effort was tried, and yeah, so to answer the question myself, I have way too much an encyclopedic knowledge of Gundam to answer this question. Like, you think there's choice
Hmm.
paralysis. I think I've read every Gundam side story manga available in English.
Right.
Like, my knowledge of Gundam things is basically encyclopedic. Where my first thought is, oh no, he said Gundam. He didn't say mobile suit. Does that mean I have to use something with Gundam in the name? So I'm going to go with
Ooh.
the Gundam Epion. It turns into a dragon. It fights in deep space. It is the literal deep space and dragon. So I'm sticking with that. Particularly my custom one in Gundam Breaker where I made a Blue Eyes White Epion,
Ooh.
modeled after the Blue
Yeah.
Eyes White Dragon of Yu-Gi-Oh fame.
Okay. Just as a random side question here, uh, is the Epion an extension of the Hammurabi?
They are completely unrelated in every single way, my friend. The Epion was made as a troll mobile suit in Gundam Wing. So you got the
Yeah.
Gundams
Okay.
in Gundam Wing walking around with their crazy weapons, and one guy's like, I don't even need a weapon. I'm just gonna have a sword. Cowards use guns. It's like you're using a giant robot. Yeah, but it doesn't have any guns on it. And a rich guy built it in his basement as a flex.
Yeah, okay. Well, I mean, now I feel foolish for even suggesting that they might be related, but they do have somewhat similar character design, model designs in SD form, at least.
Oh yeah, and they have similar weapon loadouts too.
Huh.
But before we get into another episode on Gundam, Thank you,
Right.
everybody, for tuning in, and make sure to keep sending in your questions for your chance to win digital ebooks of the Waltz of Blade Deluxe. And thank you to
And
all our. Oh, go ahead.
well, I was going to try and steal the limelight there and say thank you to our patrons because uh, fans make this series possible. So we appreciate our patrons that allow us to reach out to more people.
Yeah, thunder has been stolen. Good job. You can just keep that thunder. Go with your Sparky Dragon. Have yourself a great time.
Bye.
Bye.